Hi everyone. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. My name is Alfonso Zamarro, and I am the Drones Activities Manager at EENA. And can you go to the next slide, Petros? So basically, we are gonna try to keep it under the hour, and we're gonna basically touch base in all these points. We're gonna start the session with a small tour de table for introductions, so everyone knows who's present here in the webinar. Then we're gonna go and I'm gonna present the ENA activities that we've been doing related to drones during this year, with some Q&A at the end of that. And then we have here today with us Romeo Durscher, who's the Director of Public Safety Integration at DJI. He's going to share with us today some insights from his observations while visiting emergency services on good practices for launching a drone program. And then finally, I will give you some insights as well on the upcoming activities at ENA, and as well some ideas on how any of you can actually participate in that. So to get started, basically, next slide. Perfect. So we can get started with presentations by the people who are present here. So we can start with the order of the attendees, basically. So Biagio Lanciani.
Yeah, I'm here from Regola, Italy. Thanks.
Okay, Bocian Pederka. Bocian, can you hear us? Okay. We have Charles Werner.
Hey, this is Charles. I'm the chair of the National Council on Public Safety UAS in the United States. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. Charlotte. Charlotte, nope. Okay, we can go to Christoph.
Hi, I'm Christoph Konstantin Kreuker. I'm the CEO of Nordorf Niederösterreich in Austria.
Okay, thanks, Christoph. Damien?
Good afternoon. My name is Damien Kelleher, Sector Manager with the Irish Coast Guard, and just working on our drone program there.
Hi, anyone. I'm Daniele Radogna from Regola, Italy.
Perfect. Thanks. Dave? Dave French, can you hear us?
Yeah, so I can hear you. I'm the medical director in Charleston County, South Carolina.
Right, perfect. Thanks, Dave. David Angel?
Yes, David Angel here from Sweden, Stockholm.
Perfect. David Lane? David, can you hear us? Okay, Georgios Campas? Can you hear us, Georgios? Okay, Isabel Delfos?
Hello, my name is Isabelle Delfos. I work in Atos. I'm in charge of marketing and portfolio for GEMA. Thank you.
Thanks, Isabel. Georgian from Norway. Can you hear us, Georgian? Okay, Laxman Singh.
Hi, my name is Lakshman Singh Rana. I'm operation head from Central Excellent Trauma Services in India.
Great, thanks. Laurie Lambert.
Hi, I'm from Charleston County Consolidated 911 Center in Charleston County, South Carolina, U.S.
Great, thanks. Manslot.
I have
Steve
muted
McClendon?
Mansholt Alfonso because there is a background noise. So
Okay.
Hello, my name is Heiner Mansholt from the St. John's Service Academy in Hanover, Germany.
Great, perfect, thanks. Steve McClendon.
Hi, Alfonso. I'm Steve McClendon. I am the Middle-West Wales Fire and Rescue Service Transformation 2020 Digital Program Lead and also was responsible for implementing the use of drones within our service.
Right. Michelle.
Misal's microphone does not work, I see in the chat, but he's from IT for Innovations in the Czech Republic.
Right, perfect. Thanks, Petras. Nenad.
Hi, Alfonso. I'm Nenad Popovic from Bosnia and Herzegovina, Banja Luka Mountain Rescue.
Great, thanks. Panayotis.
Yeah, hi, Alfonso. Hi, everyone. It's Panayotis Kollios from the Kios Research Center at the University of Cyprus.
Thanks. Paresh.
Hi, it's Harish Pankani from Jaguar Land Rover. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, but very, just a bit.
It's Harish Pankani from Jaguar Land Rover.
Okay, perfect, thanks. Pete Roberts.
Hi, it's Pete Roberts from the Centre for Search Research based in the UK and working on looking at the effectiveness of drones with the University of Newcastle upon Tyne.
Thanks. Romeo.
Good afternoon and good morning. This is Romeo Durscher. I'm the Director of Public Safety Integration here at DJI, and you'll hear a little bit more about me and what we do in a little while.
Thanks, Romeo. Saleh. Can you hear Saleh? Okay, George Dracoy.
Hello, hello everyone. I'm George. I'm from SDS. I'm in charge of application administration for 112 Romania.
Okay, thanks. Tom de Jager.
Hello, I am Tom de Jager from Tersec, Belgium, director there, and we are involved in system integration for emergency services. We are also connected to North Sea Drones, which was the first National Drone Academy in Belgium for the new legislation. And we've been doing a lot of projects for the emergency services both police, land, air, and sea deployments.
Okay, thanks. Thomas Bernla. Okay, Thomas says he doesn't have a microphone. He's from Buenos Aires City in the firefighter service. And then Vaclav.
Hello, everyone. I am from IT for Innovations, National Supercomputing Center, Czech Republic.
Great. And finally, Zenek.
Zenek also wrote in the beginning on the chat that it's outside, so he cannot use a microphone.
Okay, no problem. And he says he's from the Fire Service responsible for using drones in the Czech Republic. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you very much again. So let's get started with this. So the first part, I would like to summarize a bit of the drones activities that we've been doing at ENA for 2018. So next slide. Basically, just to summarize a bit, why the European Emergency Number Association is focusing on drones. Basically, we've been working a lot in how to help emergency services use all sorts of new technologies and working how to improve their operations. And definitely drones were an opportunity as well to work on. And basically our goals here regarding drones is to understand how drones can actually help first responders, and then as well to facilitate the deployment of this technology in the different emergency services. So next slide. Now, for this purpose this year, basically we focus in three main branches. The first one is the drone efficacy study, which was published in September, and that we actually did with DJI. The second part is the Emergency Services and Drones Network that we announced a couple of weeks ago. And then finally, research on legislation, on drone legislation, to update the previous work that we did. So next slide. Starting with the drone efficacy study. Next slide. Basically, this was a project that we launched with DJI to really focus on one very specific point, which is evaluating the impact of drones for locating a lost person in a search and rescue event, specifically in mountainous regions. And the reason behind all of this is to put data behind all these claims that we hear very often, that drones can save lives, drone can help emergency services. So we wanted to choose one specific case and go very, very much in depth into it. Next slide. So for this, we got together, as I mentioned, with DJI, who have the technical expertise on drones. At ENA, we have a strong community of first responders, and then as well, we started to work with Black Channel, who are statisticians focusing on what they call stream statistics. So really focusing in environments, very rush environments, like a rescue mission in the mountains, to gather the data that we need to evaluate the drone technology. Next slide. And what we did, basically, we gathered emergency services in Ireland and Wales. Specifically, we worked very closely in Ireland with the Dublin Fire Brigade, the Civil Defence, and as well with the Donegal Mountain Rescue Team, and in Wales with Mid and West Wales Fire Rescue Service, to really define the different scenarios where we could actually operate and designing the exercises. Next slide. And for that, we chose basically 3 sites. So we went to Ireland, Sligo, as well to the Wicklow Mountains, and in Wales at the Black Mountains. And basically, the exercises consisted on 4 search sites in each one of these places, where we had different teams go out and search for a casualty. Some teams supported by drones, some teams without the drone support, and specifically measuring the time to locate of the victim. Next slide. So basically, what we encounter, can you click again, Petros? There's some transitions there. There you go. So the first thing that we encounter is basically the location success for each one of the groups. So what we encounter is that traditional ground search and rescue teams found 17 out of 20 of the cases. So that's 85%. Next slide. Well, what we observed is that, for example, the drone teams that were doing the same missions, can you click again, please? Were 23 out of 30, which is 76% of the cases. Now, next slide. This basically was kind of like shocking, isn't it, at the beginning? Okay, you have the team without the drone finding more cases than the drone, but this is actually a very impressive stat going from the drone teams. We need to consider that the drone technology is pretty new. So, and what we observed in previous research, it's how hard it was for the drone technology to actually help the search teams. And what we are seeing now is that actually we are very close to what traditional search and rescue is offering. Can you click a couple of times? Yeah. So basically, and the reasons for this is if we have traditional search and rescue, and they have actually decades of experience and hundreds of studies that actually help them mature the technique on how to actually do search and rescue. Now, knowing where the victim is, also this is an important element. Knowing where the victim is also helping for a safe and effective ground operation. So with this, we mean that actually, even if the drone doesn't find the victim by itself, which is a success element, it allows for a more efficient search without putting people on the field into risk. Next slide, please. Now, going back to the key element of this main study, click one more time, please. Time to locate. This is basically what we wanted to focus on. And then here the findings were quite impressive. If we go to the next slide, we see that actually, one more click, we encountered that when the drone found the victim, it was actually 191 seconds faster. And actually, if we click again, we can see that if we take out the layers, it was actually 206 seconds faster. Next slide. So this means that it's actually almost 3 minutes faster than the traditional method. And this shows actually a trend, an impact of how the technology is actually could actually help us improve mountain rescue. And actually, 3 minutes is already quite an advantage. 3 minutes can help us save a life. And as well, all these tests that we did were done with visible light sensors and with manual flight, so without any extra capacity like thermal cameras or automatic flights or any other software that could actually help on the detection of victims. Next slide. Now, as well, this gives us a great opportunity to understand more from a qualitative point of view. Next slide. So, actually, one of the big observations that we did. So, properly utilizing drones, it's difficult. I mean, it's not hard to learn how to fly a drone. What is hard is how to properly use it in a rescue operation. And this comes to the point where we are all focusing a lot on the aircraft and the drone itself, but there's way more than only the drone. Next slide. For example, one key element that we saw is that there is no clear drone-enabled search and rescue process of using a drone. we see that there are people with a lot of experience and they know how to use the platform, and they're actually able to bring a lot of benefits to the search teams, but there's actually no defined ways of using the drone technology. So that means there is a lot of teams that actually need to pass through a long learning process to really benefit of the potential of this technology. Next slide. Finally, as we mentioned, we use manual flight and as well only visual camera, but to really obtain a better insights from drones, there is a lot of technology that we can actually start adding to the process. And how we process this data is also critical into how drones could help us. And we're talking here again as, for example, computer vision for detecting certain elements, automatizing the flight of the drone so we don't need to use so many people into the drone operation by itself, etc., etc. Next slide. And finally, we really believe there is more research that is needed to be done. Again, as we mentioned, search and rescue, traditional search and rescue, is packed by a lot of previous research. So the protocols of how to do search and rescue are very, very optimized. Right now for mountain rescue with drones or the usage of drones in general, there is some research that is starting to be done, but there is not as there's still not as much as traditional search and rescue. So really, we need to start sitting down and do way more research in all these different elements that we mentioned to really get to understand how the drone technology can actually help us. Next slide. And some suggestions that come to our mind. Next slide. Basically, what's very important here is to sit down all the different experts that are working in this field and start creating these tactics protocols of how to use the drone, of how to communicate between the drone team and the ground team that's out there on the field, but as well on how to train all these people. So we have a standardized way of training the drone operators for this specific mission. Next slide. And then something that we saw, thanks to the work thanks to the work that we've done, and as well as some work that's been done in other places, we know now that rigorous research is possible and is very beneficial. There is a lot of data and learnings that we are obtaining by doing this kind of field research. So it's not only about sitting in a workshop and talking about the potentiality of the technology, but really getting out there and working with rigorous procedures to gather data and detecting the points where we can actually improve and the points where we are actually strong and we can actually share this around. Next slide. So this is it basically for the drone efficacy study. Now, focusing on the two last points that we've been working on. The emergency services and drone network. This is something that we launched right now at ENA. Next slide. And basically what we are aiming for is to bring together all these people that are being involved in public safety and drones to really understand truly how this technology can help first responders. Next slide. So this is basically a network that we are launching for basically for emergency services that are working in this field. And what what's going to serve us for and what is going to help our community is to basically participate in all these ENA projects. We want to use this as a group that we know that we can just launch several calls for the projects and gather the people that are actually interested to participate. It's also a way for transforming our working group and our community online into actual ENA members, and this has as well many benefits, basically to be part of the ENA community and network with other professionals, but as well to attend other ENA events and access to other information, not only drones, but also the other projects. Next slide. And well, basically, if you're interested in joining this network, you can just drop me an email and I'll send you more instructions on how to join. Next slide. And finally, the last point is about legislation research that we've been running through this year. Next slide. So if some of you remember, in 2015, we actually published a white paper called RPAs and Emergency Services. On the link, actually, there you can find the document. And in this document, we did quite some research on what was the status in 2015 on the legislation for drones. Now, this was 3 years ago, but legislation, well, the technology and everything evolved very, very fast. And what we saw at that time is that there was not much legislation out there. And many countries now have been working, creating this framework. We even have an European framework that's going to be launched soon, and that's going to be deployed all around Europe. Next slide. So the goal of this research, we're going to be publishing this a report on this shortly, is really to update the research that we did before, but as well to understand how first responders are being included in this legal framework. And this is very important because you will see later on the webinar that we're going to be doing more work with our community on how emergency services should be contemplated and defining what's the best way actually to include them on the legislation. Next slide. And this is basically what we encounter. So very summarizing it and going through it, what we saw is that right now what we have around Europe is 3 main categories of including emergency services in their legal framework. I mean, this is very important because emergency services are not hobbyists using drones. I mean, we're talking here about people that can actually save lives, that are in critical environments, and you need support from your civil aviation authority to operate easily. So we have 3 categories that we encounter. The first one is aircraft states, and this is basically countries where emergency services drones are considered aircraft states. That means that they have exemptions to operate freely. Exceptions, depending on the country, they can vary from flying beyond line of sight, flying by night, the capacity of the drone, etc., etc. And this basically, it's a category that only is given to public safety and national security entities, and that includes military, police, fire services, and many others like search and rescue, medical emergencies. Now, the tricky point here is that the definition of public safety and national security is very broad as well, depending on the countries. So in some countries, it's only the military. Some countries includes military and police, but it excludes fire services, medical emergencies, and others, etc., etc. We can see that some countries that have this kind of format, some examples, but there are many more, could be Austria, Denmark, Finland, Poland. Now, the second category that we observe is what we call special permits. So in this case, there are no state aircraft category, but what we see here is that there is a standardized process to obtain these special permits, which makes it quite easy for the emergency service to request, okay, we're gonna need to operate in these environments, and there is a defined criteria that they need to cover. An example could be here, we have Spain, where actually Spain is a hybrid because police and military are considered state aircrafts, while fire services, they need to request, go through the requesting permits, and with that requesting the special permits because they are fire service. And finally, what we'll observe as well is there are some countries where what we call is a case-by-case scenario. There is no defined exemptions or statuses for emergency services or really anyone. And in this case, special permits are given under a case-by-case process under request. So there is really no defined way of obtaining it, but emergency services may have the opportunity of speaking with their civil aviation authority and obtain the permissions they need. This is, for example, the case of Slovakia, where they mentioned they have this format, but they're actually looking into adding the new EASA European framework when it's released. Next slide. Now, here are some thoughts and recommendations that come to our mind. So there is a great need to standardize the approach for public safety permissions around Europe. The first reason is emergency services, as we said, work in very critical environments and have great impact in our society. So it's important that we have the best practices in how actually can we optimize and make this process much more efficient. Not to mention that actually many emergency services work as well in cross borders. So the more standardized that we are in Europe, the more the easier it is to have this interoperability between countries. The second point is we need to include all the emergency services. We saw there is a lot of diversity in what are considered public safety entities. As I said before, some of them are military, some of them are police. Some countries, they don't consider emergency fire services or medical emergencies into this category, while all of them do a very critical job. And actually, the drone applications can go beyond what we think nowadays. So in order to not exclude the potential application of drones in these environments, we should include all emergency services in this. And finally, and this is something that we want to do now, is we need to create a space of discussion between first responders and civil aviation authorities to understand those needs and to really set what are the good standards to follow. In some countries, they started to do this already, but this is something that I will mention more in detail in the next year activities that we're going to be fostering as well. So next slide. Okay, this is everything from my side at the moment. Before jumping into Romeo's part, does anyone have any questions?
Hey, this is Charles.
Hi, Charles.
My question is, when you were doing the efficacy study, did you basically find out that you need to conduct search and rescue operations the same way that you've been doing them, and then you added the drone into that element, or just how did that shape itself?
So the drone efficacy study was basically to give us a bit more of light and put data into this field. I would say that doing more research would involve, first of all, defining protocols of action of drones in monitoring in search and rescue, so we can actually test them again with more defined protocols and see how they actually perform. There is more research to do as well on everything that's technology, how it applies into this field. And obviously doing more research in quantity as well, because the more data, the better to get conclusions. So more than repeating what we did, it's with the conclusions that we obtained, how can we do more?
So the follow-up would be, perhaps there's an opportunity that we could work together to take what you've done and expand it into the United States and pull more public safety responders that are using it to add to your study.
Yeah, definitely.
Charles, this is Romeo. Just to add a little bit to that, on this particular study, we did a two-arm study. Arm one was, ground search and rescue, the traditional one, and then the second arm was drone-enabled. And we let the drone-enabled team decide how they want to utilize all their assets. So the 5-member team, they could either all be at the drone station, or they could have a drone operator and a visual observer and then 3 people in the field. It was up to them to decide. And what we really wanted to do is we wanted to get a baseline. And that's why we chose only visible light camera, manual flight, so we have a baseline. So any additional research that is done, we can now compare to the baseline and see what is the impact if we were to use a thermal camera, or if we were to use a drone SAR to automate the flight. And I think that will help us in the future with additional research. And I would love to get more of that done here in the US and pull from the experience level that's here.
Great, thank you both.
Thanks, Charles. Any more questions?
Alfonso, it's Pete Roberts here. Just as an input and a further thing to Romeo there, We're actively doing that kind of work in the UK, but looking at the effectiveness and trying to quantify PODs for the use of drones for missing persons. And our recent report, Exercise Northumberland, is available on our website.
Perfect. Thanks, Pete. Since we are way over time, let's jump into Romeo's presentation. And as well, if you want to find more about this, the drone efficacy study is also published in our website, where you can find even more details about everything that we did, the recommendations, conclusions, etc., etc. Okay, Romeo, floor is yours.
All right. Again, thank you for joining us this afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. It's great to see that we have people not only from Europe, but from the United States, from India. So clearly this movement is not limited by a continent, but something that we worldwide can use. So let's talk about the topic of how to start a program. What are some of the challenges and what are some of the things that we have seen in the field? So let's get started. My name is Romeo Durscher. I'm the Director of Public Safety Integration. And Petros, go for the next slide. Thank you. There are my contact information. If you have questions, if you want to have more information or just network, please feel free to reach out. Next slide. So I'm going to look at the current state of this technology, how it's integrated, some of the challenges, and then also some of the best practices to get a program started. If we look at the next slide, we can see that the technology, the trends are there. The Center for the Study of the Drone at Bard College, they're doing an annual report on how public safety agencies here in the United States are using the technology and how it's growing. And if we look at the year-by-year growth, we can see that 2015 to 16, it was it just doubled, and from 16 to 17, it pretty much doubled again. And when this report was last released in May 2018, we were already past the 2017 numbers. So I'm looking forward for this report to come out next year. And what we can see is that law enforcement is really the driving factor, from the county police, sheriff to municipality police departments. They are the big chunk of public safety users, followed by fire and EMS. So if we hit the slide again, Petros, we can see that law enforcement, fire are the two big areas, and we do have a steep adoption rate. So this is not a fad. This is not something that just popped up and will disappear. This is here to stay. Let's look at the next slide. So what we can see is, let's look at drone RFPs by department. And this is a report that we worked on with eRepublic and GovTech and released in October 2018. And we can see again that law enforcement and correction departments are the big driver of RFPs. The public safety as a general, you can see that there's a couple of, there's public safety departments and there's fire departments. They could have been lumped together. But public safety is really the big driver of the utilization of this technology when it comes to city, local, state government type of environments. Next slide. So what are some of the key drone use cases? This question was asked in that survey, and people were able to give multiple answers. But it's clear that access to hard-to-reach areas and creating aerial photography for a variety of different purposes are the top use cases. And then, of course, what we're realizing is that the ability to do mapping, very accurate mapping, either pre-incident or post-incident, are tremendously helpful. And then we're already seeing the search and rescue and the disaster recovery and inspection, firefighting, and so on. So there definitely are tremendously beneficial use cases that help departments to be more effective, more efficient, and in the end also safer. On the next slide, we can then also look at how do people think about drones, and it's half of the respondents said, well, it's very useful technology. And then there is also now the, yeah, it's very interesting, but you know, there's still a lot of things we have to jump over in order to get it implemented. And that's fascinating because as we can see, it's not easy to start a proper drone program. The good news is that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of useful information already out there that help departments. And to me, very fascinating was the 10% said this is a necessary tool to our organization. And to me, this is a testament that if you do implement it right, if you use it right, it's something that every department should have. And Commander Madigan with the Alameda County Sheriff's Office once said, it's negligent not to use a drone. And I think that's a very, very valid point. Next slide. So what are the motivations for adopting a drone program? And obviously, if you're in public safety, then you want to increase the public safety sector in general. And that means, you know, keeping the communities more safe, but also keeping you and your team out of harm's way as much as possible. If we can mitigate risk with technology, implementation of technology, everybody wins. And I think that's a very, very big point. Preparing for an emergency, we see this more and more. Just here in California alone, over the last 14 months, we have deployed to 3 large wildfires. And those wildfires didn't just destroy 100 homes. We're talking about tens of thousands of homes that were destroyed in those 3 wildfires. And in all 3 of them, we utilized drone technology. So no matter what, we are being faced with more of these large-scale disasters, and utilizing the technology really helps us either preparing or then also utilizing it during and after those events. And one of the big points is safer for employees. That's, to me, one of the biggest underrated points, because as you know, if we can keep injury from not happening, we're so much better off. We're not disrupting the teams. We're not adding additional costs. We're not adding overtime to cover that particular person's function. And that is tremendously beneficial and runs through an entire organization into the city, into the county, and to state level. All right, next slide, please. So what are some of the challenges? And we can hop through those really quick. How do you get started? That's always that big roadblock, because where do you start? Then also the next one is sometimes there's a lack of support. It could be internal support. It could be your organization that is just not as open to new technologies. But it could also be the community that may have a different idea of what drones are. And so getting that support is important. And then, of course, how to get the hardware, what kind of hardware, how to integrate it, how do approvals work, and then how do these machines fly? So there are a lot of challenges, and it can be overwhelming if you're about to start a program. Next slide. So we have some recommendations, and I put them into different phases. So phase 1 is, you know, reach out and connect with departments either in your area or in your country that are already using drones. Creating that network, learning from their experiences definitely helps. Then find internal support, identify a strategy, do your standard operating procedures and outline what you do, but also outline what you don't do with UAV. And that is very, very important. It's not just what we're doing with it, but what we will not be doing. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. Use reports that are already out there that justify or give additional information on how drones can be helpful, like the drone efficacy study that Alfonso mentioned. And then also think about how you are going to overcome those organizational and staffing issues, because what you will realize is Once you implement a drone program, it's not just going to be one drone and one operator and one visual observer. You have multiple shifts and multiple people, and the need grows, and suddenly you have an entire fleet. So think ahead. And reality is there is no one integration model. What works for one department may not entirely work for the department next door. So you have to see what fits best into your organization, and then learn about the policy and the regulatory environment in your area, in your country, as well as in your organization. Next slide. Phase 2 is get the community to buy in, be transparent. This is not something you just do in the quiet back office and don't tell anyone. In fact, directly address privacy concerns. Talk to the entities that are concerned about privacy issues. Get them involved in the development of your SOPs. Most of the time, a department may already have privacy laws or standards set, because nowadays we have body-worn cameras, we have cameras inside vehicles, so a lot of data is already being collected. But be as transparent as possible. And two great examples are right here with Alliance Pro Drones, which has a fantastic Twitter feed, and it's the DroneSat PD, as well as Modesto Police and Fire that have an Instagram where they share experiences, use cases, and get the community directly involved. Next, clearly describe your use cases. As I mentioned before, make sure that you also tell your communities when you are not going to use that technology. Obviously, if you're in law enforcement, you may not want to use it for just regular surveillance, and clearly make sure that your community knows what is being used for and what it's not being used for. Show, not tell. That means show the community, bring the technology out to community events, show them what these platforms look like, because a lot of people have a completely different idea of what a drone means. And we're not talking about military drone, but also show them what the footage looks like. A view of a fire on a thermal camera can be very impactful to individuals, because now you can explain what you're looking at and why this is helpful, and that gets community buy-in and trust. All right, and again, emphasize the safety of emergency personnel and the public. This technology helps keep not only the public safe, but also our men and women that are on the ground fighting these incidents, from fire to law enforcement to search and rescue, disaster recovery and relief. So making sure that people understand it not only helps us all, but especially those public safety people. All right. One thing that I keep seeing is a lot of departments, they now get the approval, they now get a budget, and it's time to start the program, and they go big. They get big drones, they get big platforms, and they don't scale it up properly. And the suggestion really is start small. Start a small program, get some easy to use drones, even if they are not the big, large drones that are super impressive, but the small ones that you can easily deploy, that are nice to fly, that may not have all the features ready, like a thermal camera or drop mechanism. But the key is start small, get some wins under your belt, and then scale up. Because if you can go back to your leadership and show use cases where it made a big impact, the support will grow on this project. And some departments started off big with platforms that were way beyond their needs, and some of them got shelved fairly quickly, and that's the last thing you want. Next page. And the last phase of this implementation recommendation is, click again, Petros. Understand the procurement issue. So once you have your approval and you're ready to go and start placing orders, first of all, understand what technology is out there, what it is that you need, that you want to implement, and then also figure out how your department, how your city or county operates in regards to placing those purchase orders, the time it takes, and all of that. Furthermore, identify the training needs. It's clear that when you start a program, there's a lot of training that needs to happen, not only on the hardware, how to fly it, but how to best utilize it, how to get the data to the people that matters, that need to see it, your incident commanders, how to do small maintenance, how to do troubleshooting in the field. So there's a lot of things that need to be learned. And then, of course, get also all your document waivers and approvals in place. Depending on where you operate in, where your country of residence is, you may have to first get an initial drone to even apply for certain waivers with your air authority. So depending on where you are, that step can come first, further up or later. But it's definitely important that you familiarize yourself with the entire process of getting these various approvals and waivers, so you can potentially also fly at nighttime or in particular airspace that otherwise you may not be able to fly in. And then ensure that your ongoing needs are covered. And this one is one that a lot of departments underestimate, because what happens is you quickly realize that once people see the benefit of the drone, they want the drone to be out there more often. But now you may not have the proper staffing. You will realize that you're collecting a lot of data, and you may have a certain data retention policy in your department, so you need extra server or hard drive space. And then once your fleet grows, you need to keep better track of equipment and pilots and hours. So additional software needs may be needed to help you oversee an entire program. So just think ahead. Think of, what if my program scales up? How ready am I to deal with all of that? And that's it. It's actually that simple. So if there are any questions, feel free to ask.
Thank you, Romeo. So we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions.
So it's Panayotis from Kios. Thanks, Romeo, for the interesting presentation. I was just, while you were talking, I was just looking to find this study with e-Republic and government technology, but I couldn't find it online. So can you give us a link to it?
Yes, let me go look for it, and I'll put a link into the chat.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Right, thanks. 1 more question. Okay, then we can jump to the last part of the presentation. Peter's going to switch slides. Thanks. So just to finalize, basically upcoming activities, what are we planning to do at ENA, and also how can all of you participate in this? Basically, there are 3 areas of focus that we have right now. We mentioned them previously on the conclusions. So the first one is operational standards. The need to create these procedures on how to use drones, how to communicate, how to train in all the different environments of emergency services using drones. The second part is basically more field research and more data generation to understand how this technology actually is helping and how can we measure it. And the final part is legislation standards, working on creating these elements so emergency services are included in the best way in the legal framework on their own countries. So next slide. So focusing on the first point, operational best practices, we want to next year start working with different experts in this field in search and rescue standards. And that's going to mean that we're going to create a group to work in these, gather insights, and generate these standard best practices around the sector We want to do this with our community. So if you're interested in this topic, please reach us out. And the whole goal is to publish a document at the end of the year with best practices in monitoring and rescue using drones. Next slide. The second point is a legislation position paper. Basically, now what's happening right now is that we're going to have a new legislation at the European level, but then it's going to be up to the countries to mention, to define how they're going to include emergency services within these frameworks. So we want to get together with our community, the first responders using drones, understand their needs, and put out there a document summarizing the elements that legislation should include to actually help emergency services adopt this technology. This doesn't mean that we must be very clear here. This means as well that the standards of security, etc., that need to be required to emergency services. It's really we want really to create this standard so emergency services know clearly what they need to do from the legal point of view, and also not only on procedure but as well on standards and requirements. Next slide. So, and finally, we're going to do more field research. Now, we are still finalizing the details for these, but you're going to hear some news on this. We're going to be doing another research on fire and rescue services, and then another one in medical emergencies. So for this, I invite you to keep to follow us. We're going to actually release some news in this. And if you're working in this field, you're going to be welcome as well to join and help us with the research. Next slide. And just to finalize, I don't know if you're all aware, but in April, there's a ENA annual conference, which all of you are invited to come over. There's going to be several topics. You can actually see that at the ENA website. Next slide. But actually, we have a pre-conference drone workshop together with DJI, really hands-on, focusing on the practical part of it, to really understand how to set up your drone program, what's the current state of the technology, the future trend to it, etc., etc. You can find more information on the link, and it's limited. So if you're really interested, you should actually sign up as soon as possible. And also during the conference, we're going to have more opportunities to network among the people from the drone community at ENA and to meet as well experts in different fields. Next slide. And well, this is basically it. You have here my contact details. If you're interested in hearing more information, joining the ENA workshop, or interested in participating in our activities, or also if you have any ideas that you would like to share with us on activities that you may want to have, feel free to reach us out in any of these channels. So, well, this is basically it. So if you have any questions, we may be able to take a couple of those.
Hey, on that last event you had, is that date correct on there?
Go back.
It's 2019.
Yes.
Yes, you're right.
Oh, 19, yes. Yeah. Sorry for that typo.
Alfonso, I make the same mistake all the time on the website. It's very difficult to tackle.
April next year, not this year. Yes. Thanks, Charles.
I thought maybe you guys in Europe had a time machine or something.
Even better than drones. Anyway, any questions? Otherwise, we can close up the webinar.
Alfonso, hi, it's Pete Roberts here from the UK. In your future, more field research is needed. You highlighted fire services and medical. Does mountain rescue or search and rescue not figure in that?
So 2019, we're going to do research, but not field research for mountain rescue. So that means that the years after, it's possible that we will do work on field work on that, but not the next year.
Well, I mean, we are independently going to be doing some in that area, so we'll input as we achieve things. Okay.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point to raise. Let us know, because we're interested in the work that people are doing out there as well in this field.
Yeah, I put a note on there that would be a great function of this group is to get a contact list circulated and for everyone to share what they're doing, and so we don't reinvent the wheel around the world.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Actually, we have also a group on Facebook with different people in this that we can also use to share this kind of elements. I can share that information with you if you want.
Hey,
okay.
Alfonso, there's also a Facebook page, UAS for Public Safety Working Group, that has a lot of people from the United States on it as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, sounds good. Pass it over and I can circulate it as well, Charles.
Alfonso, one more question, please. From Romania. How is the perception accuracy of the information sent by drones regarding height, depth, landforms, colors?
Could you repeat the question? We cannot hear you very well.
How is the perception accuracy of the information sent by drones? I'm talking about height, depth, landforms, colors.
The perception of the information sent by the drone.
The perception of the information sent by the drone. No.
Could you actually type the question? It may be easier to understand.
I already typed it. If you can.
Okay.
Maybe what I can propose, Alfonso, sorry to jump in. I will send all the information to the people of the call after the call, the presentations and so on. So maybe if there is any questions that cannot be articulated at this moment.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Yeah, let's do that. If you can send me the question, and I will answer it as soon as possible. Might be easier, and we're also running out of time. So okay. So again, thank you everyone for participating, and we keep in touch.
Thanks, Alfonso. Thanks, Romeo. Thanks a lot for the presentations.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.